You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside and outside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. Alongside Matt Adams, I'm Dave Griffiths. Glad to have you along. Our own Mike Chappell taking the week off, and much deservedly so for him during this time when there really isn't that much of news to break down, fortunately. For the Colts this time of year is when you hope there's really no news, as we've kind of outlined before here. But Matt and I will kind of plan to break down what's happened this entire offseason, kind of get you set for what's to come. Also, there was one, I guess, little thing that happened this week, and that's what Matt and I will start off with this week, is that the Colts have announced their training camp schedule. And I know it's been a great thing up at West Park over the past, up at Grand Park rather, over the past decade or so since they've been there, a little bit less than that. But it's something that Matt, it's not as common anymore, obviously, around the NFL that teams will have these open practices, that they'll go away together for camp. A lot of teams still do it at their own team headquarters. Some coaches, some GMs prefer that. They like to keep things in-house and have as much control as possible and just no outside eyes on them. So Colts fans should be, I think, somewhere between grateful and ecstatic that they still have this opportunity to see the team and to for either very cheap or nothing at all to be able to see them during this time of year, get some face-to-face contact with them a little bit. And it's something that they value, that the Colts value. So like I said, Colts fans should be pretty grateful for this opportunity that they have to see them in Westfield.
Yeah, it's always great that the team can go out there and the players see that. Fans can see the players and they'll do autograph sessions and stuff like that. I know that families like Colts City, which is something they set up, it's got a play field out there, a bunch of activities. It's got the Colts in Motion traveling exhibit as well out there. And this year they will have 12 open practices. The first one will be on July the 25th at 10 o'clock in the morning. Final practice will be August the 15th. That'll be the last of the two joint practices with the Arizona Cardinals. That's an evening practice at 6 p.m. One thing, too, that the Colts for years have, for the most part, kept this free. You have had to pay for parking at Grand Park, which is usually $10 on site, $5 if you get an advanced parking pass. This year, for kind of 5 of their more popular practices, their first weekend practices, the joint practices, and then one additional practice on August the 4th, which I believe is a later practice as well. They're charging people $5 to get in this year, and that is for people who are 18 and over. And so that's something people will have to adjust to. What they won't have to adjust to is you still have to download a ticket, whether you're going on the $5 day or you're going on one of the free days. You still have to download a ticket. So in order to do that, now the Colts said they're instituting that $5 fee. In order to better know who's coming and have better kind of awareness of what the crowd's going to be, and so they can better manage parking, and then the money is going to go to the YMCA's flag football program that they're instituting this summer. So just something people should be aware of. I think they're used to paying for the parking there, but not necessarily to get in.
That's right. That is the one new thing really this year. It's all the night practices and then that one extra practice on that first weekend, that back together weekend that they have. Excuse me. I've had a cough for a week, so I apologize if one or two escape me over the next hour or so, or a little bit less than that we'll be on with you today. So yeah, those are the practices out there. You can find them all on our website, fox59.com, cbs4indy.com. Where we've had coverage all summer long with all the various storylines that have percolated out there, and that's really what we're going to focus on for the majority of this episode, which probably won't be as long as our usual ones, but kind of want to recap how we got here, we got here entering the 2024 season in regard to the Indianapolis Colts and our top 5 storylines from this past offseason. Again, any more information you want on training camp, head to fox59.com, cbs4indy.com. You can read all about it there and find out exactly which days, which specialty days there are, and themes and everything that you can experience out there in Westfield. But number 5 offseason storyline for the Indianapolis Colts. any veteran safeties out there? It was really the one area that we thought could have used somewhere in the secondary could have used some help, and safety maybe more so than quarterback. You can make a debate, I think, either way, but it is the one position that has been relatively unaddressed, other than really bringing Julian Blackmon back for another season. But you have Nick Cross, you have Julian Blackmon, you have Rodney Thomas, are the three guys back there who have seen significant playing time. And unfortunately, the second-year safety out of Cal, Daniel Scott, fell on injured reserve for his second year in a row. Last year it was an ACL. This year it was a torn Achilles during the offseason program. So, Matt, it's not the most experienced group back there, although Rodney Thomas has kind of had 2 seasons basically as a starter. Blackmon has been in the league for 4 years now, so he has 4 years as a starter. Nick Cross does not have starting experience, and after that, it's a group of guys with no starting experience for the most part. If you want to count Rodney Harrison in there, whether he's more of a hybrid safety linebacker, whatever it might be. So you could argue that there's some starting experience there, but it's a very young group, so it's a group that was obviously viewed as one that the Colts might add some help. They did not at the end of the day, and they're kind of running it back with Blackmon and hoping that Nick Cross takes another step forward. But right now it looks very much like it did at the end of last season.
Yeah, the unit just feels a little bit thin on the experience side. And, I think everybody would feel, outside observers anyway, would feel a little bit better if, like, Rodney Thomas had been a solid presence last year, but he ended up kind of losing his job late in the year. And I think that causes a little bit of anxiety there. Having Daniel Scott being injured, he was going to be a second-year player for the Colts anyway. And you look at this position group and you're like, a second-year guy gets injured with a torn Achilles, and you were going to be relying on that guy. That's not necessarily the situation you want your position group to be in. So, and, while we certainly have questions about cornerback, without a doubt, you do feel like at least what the organization has voiced is that they've got confidence in the secondary guys. They know that they're young. They feel like they may have, played better than what the perception was last year of that unit, but they're not necessarily saying the same things about the safety unit as a whole, even though we all know that the team likes Julian Blackmon a whole lot. So, it just makes you kind of wonder, will they add somebody? And they have had a history, we've talked about this on the podcast before, of bringing in guys like a Rodney McLeod or a Mike Adams, somebody who's a veteran, has 5 to 10 years of experience that they can get on a deal, bring in right before training camp and kind of fit in there just to give that unit a little more depth and a little more. It's not even really a depth thing because there's other people they can put at safety, but it's really just having some experience there, just in case one of those guys does have to go down or miss a couple of games, that you have a veteran presence back there that can secure the back end of that defense.
Right. Now what the Colts would most love to see is Nick Cross alongside Julian Blackmon. That would be their ideal duo in the secondary and the back end. And Blackmon's locked in, obviously. He started off his career as a free safety, but he's really transitioned into the strong safety that's more the box safety, and he's kind of locked down that position. That is his spot right now. And so it's the free safety position that's the one that's more in question. And you're right, Matt. Like, the issue is that Rodney Thomas, having started his entire rookie year, and then at the start of his second year, lost that spot. He did not play it well enough to keep the starting free safety spot. So that's when things were kind of thrown into a bit of turmoil. Whether it was Nick Cross seeing more playing time, whether it was Rodney Harrison getting more back there on the back end. But it was really most evident the problems back there when Julian Blackmon was injured as well at the end of the year, and C.J. Stroud, the final week of the year, just tore through that defense, the secondary, like it was tinfoil. So, a Blackmon back will help, no doubt about it. I love to see Blackmon back there. I've said many times on this podcast how much I like safety play and how much I enjoy watching good safety play, and I think Blackmon is a good safety. Excuse me. But that second position, the free safety spot, is crucial for not letting anything behind the defense, for not giving up those big plays. And those chunk plays can make the difference between winning and losing a game, obviously. So, so you look at what the Colts have, and you look at what's available out there, because there are safeties out there still with plenty of experience. This was a unique offseason that had a slew of veteran safeties on the market, and Julian Blackmon found this out firsthand, that since there was such a large swath of guys available, no safeties were getting really the deals that they wanted because teams had options that were looking for safety. And there are still guys out there like a Justin Simmons, who's a 4-time second-team All-Pro player, twice a Pro Bowler, Condre Diggs, who's a 3-time Pro Bowler, who are still free agents, who never saw a deal that they liked. So if the Colts want to sign a veteran, they have options out there like those guys, like a Micah Hyde from Buffalo, like a Tayshaun Gibson from San Francisco, Jordan Whitehead, who has played for the Jets. Guys who have experience playing and starting in the NFL. Right now, they are not doing that, obviously. And I think they want to see what they've got. And that could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. And honestly, last year with safety, it turned out to be probably a questionable thing at best, because they saw what Rodney Thomas did his rookie year, and they were optimistic he could take a step forward his second year. But then he ended up losing the job partway through the season. So if you're going in with this group again, it's definitely playing with fire a little bit, because it did not work before, and Nick Cross hasn't done enough yet to prove that he deserves to be out there on a game-to-game, play-to-play basis. So if you end up getting injuries out there, you're immediately throwing very inexperienced guys into a must-play and must-play well situation. So the Colts right now have cap space. They have, according to Spot Rack, about $24 million in salary cap space for this year. So they definitely have room to bring in a veteran safety if they so choose. So Matt, like I said, I understand what the Colts are doing, but at the same time, I really do think they are playing with fire a little bit with what they have, especially after losing Daniel Scott. Not that he would have been this bastion of support coming off the bench anyway, because he has zero NFL playing experience. But it's a group that leaves a lot of questions to be answered, and the Colts are hoping that they just answer them in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, also when you consider injuries and such. I mean, Blackman's been pretty good. He's been excellent for the Colts when he's been in the lineup, but he has had 2 major injuries before, college and then with the Colts as well. And then he missed a portion of the season last year with an injury, and that's just going to happen. That's a fact of life. It's not he's injury prone and stuff like that. It's just a fact of life. Guys are going to miss a game or two here, and you need to make sure that, there's going to be a drop-off from your starter to your second guy, but you want to make sure that it's not an inexperienced person that's going to have to fill the breaches there. And that's kind of where you feel like the Colts are right now. You did mention they've got some cap space, and they've got some time, and I also feel like, these safeties that were out there, these veterans, a lot of these guys were big money guys. They go to the market. The market does not want to pay these guys big money. Also, these guys probably don't want to have to go through the offseason programs. They're veterans. They know what's going on there. So they can afford to wait probably until training camp starts to sign, and that's probably what we'll see. I will not be surprised if the Colts sign, somebody of note. I'm not saying it will happen 100% or anything like that, but I will not be surprised if that happens because, again, we're observers. We don't necessarily get into the roster building and all the stuff. We don't watch all the film and everything that the team does. But you do feel like you need something a little more solid back there, and we're not the only ones saying that either. We've heard that from a lot of different observers about this Colts team.
Number 4 offseason storyline for the Colts, their number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, bringing in defensive end Laiatu out of UCLA. After 14 offensive players go off the board in the first round, the Colts had their choice of whoever they wanted on the defensive side, and they viewed Latu as the most intriguing, best upside, and perhaps best immediate impact pick in this draft. It is the highest pick they've used on a pass rusher since Dwight Freeney, Syracuse University's own, back in 2002. Latu had a stellar college career in terms of production, especially the last 2 years at UCLA, after a serious neck injury and surgery forced him into a brief retirement when he was playing for the Washington Huskies. He did not want to retire. He came back, went somewhere else. Their doctors cleared him, and then he turned into one of the best defensive players in football. I would include just the entire kind of Colts plan in this first, in this first round for this storyline, that they tried to trade up. And we anticipate, as our Mike Chapel has estimated, that was probably mostly for Malik Neighbors, is who he thought they were trying to trade up for in this first round. But no team wanted to move back, especially move back that far to where the Colts were. So they made some efforts to get another offensive playmaker, but it just did not pan out that way. And they get what they hope is a good defensive playmaker to bolster what was already probably, you could argue, the Colts' biggest strength last year is their pass rush. They set an Indianapolis-era record for most sacks in the season. But they hope Latu can be a better closer than they have had in recent past and get those stops, get those sacks in the fourth quarter that you saw Freeney and Mathis make over their decade of dominance here in Indianapolis. And Latu, if he remains healthy, if that neck stays healthy, I anticipate him having a very solid NFL career. So it comes down to whether the doctors were right, and of course, just whether kind of luck falls his way, because as we know, the NFL is a collision sport. It's not just a contact sport. So you hope that nothing bad befalls him in that area. I think he can be a great player, and I do anticipate him to come off the bench at the start of the year just because of the strength of the Colts defensive line. They'll bring him along. They don't need to let him loose on every play, but I'm eager to see what he can do in the NFL, and I think if he stays healthy, Matt, that he can be a very, very good player.
Yeah, my hope is that, they'll start him off, as you said, playing situationally. I hope that when he gets in those impact moments, whether it's a 3rd and 7 or a 3rd and 13 or whatever, when he has a chance to make a play, that he's able to make those plays, and that eventually, halfway through the season or so, Latu has played himself into the starting lineup. I think that is the great hope of the Colts, and from a fan perspective, that's also what you want to see. This defensive unit is a very solid defensive unit. There is the defensive line. No doubt about that. You've got DeForest Buckner, you've got Grover Stewart, you've just got Tyquan Lewis, you've got a bunch of depth with Kwity Paye, Dayo Odeyingbo, and Samson Ebukam. You've got depth, and you've got guys that are versatile. But what they have lacked is when you get in that key situation in the game that is going to turn it, whether you need a sack, fumble, whether you need to stop, whatever, it's just not been there reliably enough. And they hope that adding Latu as this edge rusher is going to be able to do it. Like I said, I'm hoping that part of the way through the season, they have no choice but to play him a lot more snaps because he has progressed well.
Right. And you also look at what else the Colts did on the defensive line. They obviously re-signed Grover Stewart. They picked up the 5th-year option for Kwity Paye. And both Kwity Paye and Dayo Odeyingbo, the early picks from I guess what's been 4 years ago now, they both had pretty good years last year, and they both looked dangerous at times. But like we said, just that difference maker in the fourth quarter is really what has been lacking. So the Colts continue to look for that, and I'm still not completely giving up on Kwity Paye being something close to that. in his career, or being that entirely, because I think he's been kind of slowed by injuries a little bit still here and there.
That's fair.
And I know that he's already turned into a stout defensive end, like a really legit NFL defensive end. We've compared him to Jabal Sheard before on this podcast. I think that's been a good comparison, but also he's seemed more dynamic in the pass rush than Sheard has, who had, I don't know, 5 or 6 sacks a season, and Quiddy had 7 or 8 last year. So he can still go after the quarterback. Don't get us wrong when we talk about Laiatu and the pass rush and the Colts needing a pass rush that they've had none. So I think that, like, the Colts need a pass rush, obviously. If you're going to go after C.J. Stroud for the next decade or 12 plus years, you're going to need guys to go after him, and Latu can do that. The more guys you have going after the quarterback, the better you're going to be. So I completely understand why they took Latu in that position, Matt, instead of someone in the secondary, instead of a cornerback, whether it would have been the kid out of Toledo who ended up going to the Eagles, whether it would have been my guy Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, or anybody like that. I get why they took a pass rusher, even though it's a strength of the team. When you look at the secondary and you say, hey, that's the weakness, why didn't they fill that? It makes total sense to go after the pass rusher, because that's kind of where most coaches believe it begins on the defensive side of the ball.
They need that closer, and they need the person who, yes, okay, so DeForest Buckner's going to take up a couple of guys, and another defensive lineman's going to take another guy. So you need guys that can win one-on-one and make an impact, and they're hoping that Latu can do that. And again, they had the way the board fell in this NFL draft. They did try to get up. They did want to get an impact player on offense. There's no doubt about that, but they could not find a willing trade partner to do that. So with all the defensive players on the board, the Colts had their first pick of what they thought was the best defensive player. They went with Latu, and they also, as we found out in recent documentary, the Rams tried to get the Colts to move back to 19 in order to get an impact player. And the Colts, who we know, I mean, it wasn't the greatest trade proposition in the world, as we discussed last week, but we also know that the Colts love nothing better than to trade down into the draft and pick up some additional selections. And they, turned down that trade because they're just sold on Latu. So a lot of their hopes this season for some impact plays from the defensive line in key situations rest on Latu, and whether he can develop and take these moves that he's done very well on the college level and translate those into the pro game.
And we know the Colts were interested in improving their pass rush even beyond the draft this offseason. As we get to the number 3 storyline for this offseason, and that's the Houston Texans going for it all. And what I'm referring to with the Colts is their pursuit of Danielle Hunter, which ended up failing, and him signing with the Texans. Hunter was just one part of what the Texans did this offseason, but he's the one that's certainly most closely linked to the Colts as well, since they also pursued Hunter in free agency. He's been one of the best pass rushers over the past 4 or 5 years in the NFL, and probably one of the most unheralded. When you think about the best pass rushers in the league, you think the Bosa's, you think T.J. Watt, you think Khalil Mack in the past, but Hunter has had double-digit sacks multiple years, and he can be a game wrecker. So the Colts went out, they tried to sign him. Reports indicate that the Colts offered him more money than the Texans did overall, but out of the $48 million he signed with for the Texans, I believe 47 of them were guaranteed. So that's that's likely what set him over the edge to sign with Houston, and perhaps more of an interest in playing there if he thought the Texans were in better position to compete. Because last year they were. They won the division last year. They have the quarterback who's proven it right now. So you understand why a free agent, if it's completely even between Indianapolis and Houston, would want to go play for the Texans because of what they did last year and made some noise and made the playoffs and showed a whole lot of promise with Stroud. But besides Hunter, they go out and they get Danico Autry, who's had a couple really good years with the Tennessee Titans after he played here in Indianapolis. They signed the linebacker, Azeez Al-Shaair, as well, over from Tennessee. They extended Nico Collins after his breakout season and made a very big trade to acquire wide receiver Stephon Diggs from Buffalo. I think, Matt, the Colts would have loved to have seen an offseason like this, to go out and make splash, splash, splash. And I understand why completely. The Texans were in a better position to do it because they had the cap space to do it, obviously, like the Colts did, but they also had the momentum in their organization to do it. So they were a very intriguing spot for free agents to go to. Now that they've brought all these players in, it's up to the coaches and the rest of the players to kind of become one unit, to gel together. And we will see if all these moves work well together, or if, like it did in 2016, I believe it was, when the Colts made all these veteran moves and kind of blew up in their face that year. So I don't anticipate that happening, honestly, because I believe some of these players are much better players than what happened with the Colts back then. But nevertheless, this was a very dynamic offseason for the Houston Texans. They saw that what they had last year. They saw they were in good shape from their 2023 draft, and they want to strike the iron while it's hot.
And I know this is a Colts podcast, but we don't live in a bubble, and you have to talk about the AFC South. And you know, the Colts and Texans were wired down to the wire last year on who was going to make the playoffs, and the Texans got the edge. I think we all felt like quarterback play was a big part of that in that last game of the season. And, you know, also they have Will Anderson Jr. on the edge. And before they got Hunter, they had Grenard, Jonathan Grenard, who I believe was a double-digit sack guy for them as well, who ended up ironically going over to Minnesota. They kind of had a free agent swap between those two guys. So you've got to talk about the Houston Texans, and they hit on their quarterback with Stroud. We know that because what we saw last season. Will we see a sophomore regression? You might. Will these moves work out? Totally, they could, but they also could not. It could also mess with the team chemistry. Maybe it doesn't work out as well as you think it does. My goodness, bringing in the talents of Danielle Hunter, and I know on a lesser extent Danico Autry, but we've seen that guy have some huge games, both for the Colts and against the Colts, and then bringing in, you know, Stephon Diggs. And I know that, you know, if you're gonna get a guy in a trade, then it means the other team wants to get rid of him. So I know Buffalo's tired of him and whatever, but that guy is a tremendous talent over there that they got in for the Bills. And now, you know, they already had some pretty good receivers with the Texans between Nico Collins and Tank Dell and some of the other guys on the roster. And now they've added, you know, one of the top targets in the NFL. So will it work out for Houston? Maybe it won't, but it's definitely going to put the league on notice because they feel like with the coaching staff they've got in, with the front office they've got in, and with most importantly, the players that they've got in there, that if they just add some more talent, that, you know, that's going to set them up for a few seasons to come here in the AFC South. Yeah,
look, Danico Autry is obviously the unheralded signing here when you compare him to the bigger name that Danielle Hunter is, but last year, excuse me, Danico Autry had his best season in the NFL. He had 50 tackles, the most of his career. He had 11 and a half sacks, the most in his career. 12 tackles for loss, which is the second most in his career. 2 forced fumbles, the most in his career. Like, he had a stellar year at 32 years old. Now he's 33. I don't think he's over the hill yet. Because, hey, the last 3 years, I mean, he had 8, 9.5, 11.5 sacks. Like, do not sleep on the addition of Danico Autry, too. You have 2 guys who are double-digit sack guys that you bring in to be your bookend defensive ends. And Autry, as we all know here, can go inside as well in pass rush situations and be good on the inside, too. So the Houston Texans are going all in this year. This is what all in looks like.
Absolutely.
Right here.
Yes.
If you're the Houston Texans, like, you saw that you have the quarterback on a rookie contract, so you know your window is open now. It is not cracked. It is not peaking. It is open now, and they tried for it. So you cannot say that the Houston Texans front office is any sort of hesitant at all. And like I said, I think any NFL fan base, including here in Indianapolis, would love to see their front office do exactly what the Texans did this year. But now it is up to, obviously, everyone in that building to get on the same page and try to move forward. And obviously here in Indy, they're going to try to spoil the fun. They're going to try to spoil the party, and they're going to try to do it with our number 2 offseason storyline by basically bringing everyone back, by running it back. They have all 22 starters returning, the Colts do, from last year's team. They spent the majority of their offseason by retaining their own players because they did not have the ability to go out and get a big name like Danielle Hunter. They tried, but they didn't at the end of the day. So you can say, well, we tried. Well, you didn't do it. So you did not, it did not amount to anything at the end of the day. So you bring back Grover Stewart, Julian Blackmon, Tyquan Lewis, Kenny Moore, Rigo Sanchez, Rodney Harrison, Jannard Avery, Trey Sermon, Danny Pinner, Taven Bryan, all these guys who were free agents that you re-signed to come on back again. And Matt, you alluded to it. It was the Colts and Texans neck and neck all the way through the end of last season. So the Colts are hoping this unit can be buoyed by a healthy Anthony Richardson and everyone else just taking one step further in their progressions and see if that can match what the Houston Texans were able to do in terms of bringing in dynamic talent. The Colts hope that their talent can keep their unity and take a step collectively forward, and that collective step forward is a little bit greater than what the Texans were able to do kind of with the more splashy offseason that they had.
Well, it'd be interesting, too, and to step into the parallel universe where the Colts did sign Danielle Hunter, because if they do that, they spend the money on him, then some of the moves that they make to retain some of the players that, fans really do like to stay here probably aren't able to stay around because they can't afford it because they've got to spend more money to bring in an outside guy. And I can also understand some muted enthusiasm from fans on this because you do see, the Jaguars made some moves. The Titans made some moves. Obviously, we talked about the Texans. You see all these other teams sign these big money free agents, and you're just sitting here and thinking about the Colts. Okay, yeah, well, we're just going to re-sign this guy. We're going to extend that guy because they extended DeForest Buckner, and they also extended Zaire Franklin, 2 players that are very important to this team, also 2 players very deserving of those extensions. But, it's kind of hard to – they're not the new guys. They're not bringing in the new shiny toy. And so, you have to rely – if you're a Colts fan over the years, you have to rely on your draft to do that. So – it's just the team philosophy. It's the way that it's been. And, I tell you what, if we don't start to see some postseason, we don't see some results, we don't see some development of some of the young offensive players, especially Anthony Richardson, then it's going to be real tough for Colts fans. But I don't think there's any reason to lack enthusiasm coming in here because I do feel that the front office, Ballard and his folks, signed these guys with the belief that they are going to get very, very good at quarterback very, very quickly, and that by retaining this and having some continuity, it's just going to make a world of difference.
Look, yeah, I think the defensive front is really good. I think it is underrated in terms of where it is in the NFL. And like we talked about the other week on this podcast with Pete Prisco of CBS Sports' top 100 NFL players coming out and DeForest Buckner not being there, I thought that was ridiculous. There are not 100 players in the NFL that are better than DeForest Buckner. And you put him alongside Grover Stewart, who's one of the best defensive tackles in the league, one of the best run stoppers, plus the edges that they have, guys who are still reaching their potential in Kwity Dio Dangbo, a guy in Samson Ebukam who really fit into the scheme well last year, and they draft Latu. Like I said, that defensive front is really good. Zaire Franklin's proven to be one of the best tackling middle linebackers in the league. Is he as dynamic as Shaquille Leonard was in his heyday? Absolutely not. But you get a little bit of that from EJ Speed and his sideline-to-sideline playmaking ability. And what you really hope for in running it back is the secondary. The young secondary gets better. I think you're confident in the defensive line. You're confident in your linebackers. You just hope the secondary gets better. And really, you kind of hope the cornerbacks who had decent rookie years from Juju Brents to Jalen Jones, you hope they don't turn into what Rodney Thomas did in his second year. And kind of start off okay, and then really hit a big slump, and then get forced to the bench. So that is an option. That is a possibility, and that was the reason that you thought that maybe the Colts would go out and make some moves in the secondary, bring in a veteran cornerback this offseason to provide a little bit more stability back there. They did not. They drafted a couple guys. They drafted a couple guys in the secondary, but there were no significant offseason moves veteran-wise to shore up that area. So running it back means you hope the secondary on defense we're talking about specifically gets significantly better. And also we have to include in here, kind of in the run it back part, about re-signing Michael Pittman Jr. Because that was obviously a big quote-unquote addition to the future of this Colts team. But it was the one that was, Matt, most expected. It was the one that was 100% certain was going to happen, with how much Chris Ballard loves Michael Pittman Jr., with how valuable he has been, with how clearly he is the best pass catcher here in Indianapolis. So that was never not going to happen. He was never going to hit free agency. He was always going to get franchise tagged. They were always going to work on a long-term deal, and they got it. And really, Matt, when you look at his deal and you look at the other deals that have gone to wide receivers this offseason, Colts fans have to be really happy that they got him for what they did.
I know we're talking about, NFL pro football money, so it's kind of monopoly money in a sense. So when you're talking about getting a guy for a bargain, you're still talking about lots of money. But no, really, for the position that they have for Pitt, they did get him for a good deal by virtue of getting him signed before the market kind of got out of control. Base a lot of that because he wanted to stay, a lot of it because, the franchise tag and all that kind of thing. But they did get a pretty good number for Pitt. And, we saw what the offense looked like. What was it, the Atlanta game where Pitt was not out there. He couldn't play. And it was a miserable experience. And it's funny because if you look at the receiving core now with Pitt, you include, Josh Downs and A.D. Mitchell and Alec Pierce and Ashton Doolin. It sounds like a much better unit when you've got Pittman in there. If you didn't have Pitt in there, you'd kind of be like scratching your head a little bit of what are we exactly doing here? But it's kind of funny because that question mark of the receiving core that we had going into last season, it's gotten a bit better. I think the picture's a little bit better for that wide receiving core going into this year, and Pitt's a huge part of that.
Yeah, you're confident in Pitt being your top guy. I think Josh Downs did enough to intrigue you to say, like, seems like a pretty reliable piece there, and can move the chains, can work the middle of the field, can be a can be a bit of a catch and run guy, and then Alec Pierce, you still don't completely know what to expect from him.
Yeah, that's the big question mark probably. What are you going to be able to do and get from Pierce?
Yeah, and if you have a quarterback that can throw it deep, which it seems like they finally have now, not Matt Ryan or Gardner Minshew, throw it deep with consistency, like how valuable a piece is he going to be? And let's see, elsewhere in the run it back category, the kind of what the couple free agents the Colts did sign that aren't really shaking it up, but just a little bit different faces in the locker room. Defensive lineman Raekwon Davis from the Dolphins to be more of a backup to Grover Stewart, and also Joe Flacco to be the backup to Anthony Richardson. Brought him over from the Browns as he helped the Browns last year when Deshaun Watson went down from an injury. The elite quarterback, perhaps, of Joe Flacco from his time from Baltimore and the University of Delaware before that. Go Blue Hens. And, of course, that means that Gardner Minshew is gone, as is Zach Moss, who had a very good year here in Indianapolis, especially before Jonathan Taylor was back on the field. But even after Taylor was returned to action, he was still good enough to get some carries here and there and was still effective. Wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie is also left. He was mainly used in the kick return game last year, which, of course, is going to be something entirely different this year, which the Colts hope rookie Anthony Gould can be a solid addition in that area. So that brings us to our top storyline from the Colts this offseason. And, of course, that is Anthony Richardson, his continued development, and his rehab from that shoulder surgery he had in the offseason. I'm going to lead with the surgery because as long as he is taking the last day of camp off, the last day of minicamp because of shoulder soreness, that's going to be a thing. Maybe in 31 other NFL franchises, they'd view it entirely positively and not really care that Anthony Richardson, your quarterback, had a little shoulder soreness after offseason surgery. But this is Indianapolis, where a franchise quarterback retired after the third preseason game because of a shoulder injury or because of a calf injury or because of who knows what the heck the injury was. Just multiple injuries after injuries. So this franchise's fan base is understandably gun shy, no pun intended, about the gun that is on Anthony Richardson's attached to the right side of his torso there. So everything hinges on his health and his continued development. Matt, I think that it is safe to say that that the Colts will go as far as Anthony Richardson takes them, and he can take them just as far as Shane Steichen helps him progress forward this coming season.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important. And I also think fans are going to have a little bit of patience here because you still have to remember the experience level of Anthony Richardson against the elite NFL competition is not very much. I mean, he doesn't really have a lot of experience against elite college competition either, just in the terms of games and snaps and all that stuff. So there are going to be some moments where you're going to have to remember that essentially the Colts are trotting out a rookie in many regards to how much game experience he has. The hope is that he picks things up quickly. He does seem like an exceptionally bright guy who has a grasp on the offense. And you're also hoping that freakish athleticism that he possesses and that playmaking ability will kind of compensate for some of those shortcomings. And, we're going to see a lot of run-pass option, a lot of RPO stuff this year. We're going to see a lot of play action with Taylor back there. And as you said, if they go far, it's because Anthony Richards playing well. And if they stumble, it's because it's not quite able to live up to the expectations that some fans have built up for this year.
Yeah, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I think that there should be some good expectations, and there are a couple reasons. Let's say just recently on the GM Shuffle podcast, GM Chris Ballard said that Richardson will be full go for training camp. So you have that going for you. Number two, this entire offseason has been with Richardson as your starting quarterback. And that wasn't the case last year, you all remember. It was split very much evenly between Richardson and Gardner Minshew as this team tried to get ready for the 2023 season because you didn't know, if you were the Colts coaches, what you had yet from Anthony Richardson. You didn't know if he would be ready to be the starting quarterback week one. It turns out he was, and unfortunately injuries kind of derailed that whole plan. But nevertheless, last offseason was not as focused on Anthony Richardson's development as this one was, in a way, because this one was completely about getting him in charge of the offense and getting him to be able to direct it in the specific direction that the coaching staff has planned for him. And also, you mentioned Jonathan Taylor, him being there for this entire offseason, unlike last year.
Yes, the two of them playing together, man.
That I cannot stress enough. Like, it's funny that Jonathan Taylor is not in our top 5 offseason storylines, but he is going to be right behind Anthony Richardson in terms of most important players to the Indianapolis Colts' success this season. He is going to be crucial, and I would put him ahead of Michael Pittman Jr., even though you can certainly argue Pittman is the second most important player on offense just because of the wide receiver-quarterback relationship. I just think they're going to so heavily rely on Jonathan Taylor and that RPO run game. He has got to be effective for Anthony Richardson to be effective. And will Pittman have maybe more yards? I think you can argue that he will have more yards in this offense than Taylor will, but Taylor has got to be effective, man. He's got to have a good season. And if he's averaging just 4.2 yards per carry, 4.1, I don't know if that's going to really cut it and get them into the playoffs. I think he has to have more of a 4.5, 4.6, or even higher than that, more closer toward what he was able to do in 2001 for this team to really get where they want to go. So Anthony Richardson's development, Jonathan Taylor being healthy and effective, to me, those are going to be the two most important things for the Colts to get to where they want to go this year, Matt.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the Colts were able to manufacture some big plays last year with a quarterback who, we loved Gardner, but Gardner had some limitations. And the Colts were still able to manufacture and scheme up some big plays, but they will get some big plays on offense this year based just on the pure athleticism and ability of their quarterback. And that is something that other teams can't necessarily scheme against because it's just going to happen in game. Now, by that same token, that also means that same quarterback's going to make some risky maneuvers, put the ball in danger here and there, and we're just going to have to live with it. But it should be, I think there's plenty of reason for some enthusiasm about it, and I think it's going to be fun to watch.
Yep. And that'll kind of get started in just a couple weeks when the Colts convene for training camp at Grand Park in Westfield. Very first day of camp practice, July 25th, that Thursday at 10 a.m. practice. And that is one of the free practices this year. So get out there and pack it out and get to see the Indianapolis Colts for the first time in person as they get ready for the 2024 season. We're going to take the next couple weeks off here on the Colts Blue Zone podcast, give ourselves a chance to regroup and recharge as camp approaches. But we'll be back that week before training camp to really kind of set a primer for the new year, for the new training camp, for our top storylines heading into training camp. And in the meantime, you can, of course, read up on fox59.com, cbs4indy.com for any stories that happen to break along the way in terms of the Indianapolis Colts. So for Matt Adams, who's at Statamatty on Twitter, I'm Dave Griffiths at Dave G on Sports. Also follow our own Mike Chappell at mchappell51. And we will see you closer to training camp here on the Colts Blue Zone podcast.